Clint Eastwood was on his hands and knees in the scorching San Fernando Valley heat, digging a swimming pool for a wealthy family in Beverly Hills. Sweat dripped from his face onto the sun-baked dirt. His back ached. His hands were blistered. He was 28 years old, and he was absolutely convinced his dream of becoming an actor was dead. Then a car pulled up to the construction site. A man in a suit stepped out, looked at the tall, handsome young man covered in dirt and sweat, and asked him one simple question. What happened next would change the history of cinema forever. It was 1958, and Clint Eastwood was at the lowest point of his life. Just a few years earlier, he'd thought he had it made. Universal Studios had given him a contract paying $75 a week. Not much, even for 1955, but it was Hollywood. He'd appeared in a few monster movies, including Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, playing bit parts so small you could miss him if you blinked. The studios saw potential in him. He was tall, at 6'4". He had the looks, but there was a problem. The directors kept telling him the same thing over and over. His voice was too soft. He squinted too much. He couldn't emote properly. He was too stiff on camera. And the final blow? Universal dropped his contract after just 18 months. Clint tried to stay positive. He attended acting classes, hoping to improve. He went to audition after audition, but every single time he got rejected. For the film 6 Bridges to Cross, director Joseph Pevney took one look at him and said flatly, "You'll never be an actor." Clint tried out for Brigadoon, rejected. The 7-Year Itch, rejected. Bengal Brigade, rejected. By 1956, he'd stopped counting the rejections. They all blurred together into one crushing message. Hollywood didn't want him. So Clint did what he had to do. He took whatever work he could find. He dug swimming pools during the day under the brutal California sun. At night, he drove a garbage truck through the streets of Los Angeles, picking up trash while the city slept. Sometimes he'd work at a gas station, pumping fuel for people who had no idea they were being served by someone who'd once dreamed of stardom. His wife Maggie tried to encourage him. "Don't give up," she'd say. But Clint was starting to wonder if she was just being kind. Maybe the directors were right. Maybe he really would never be an actor. Maybe it was time to face reality and find a real career, something stable that could support his growing family. The swimming pool job he was working on that hot summer day in 1958 was particularly brutal. The family wanted it done fast, and the ground was hard as concrete. Clint swung his pickaxe, breaking up the earth inch by painful inch, his muscles screaming with every strike. This was his life now. This was what his Hollywood dream had become. That's when the car pulled up. At first, Clint barely noticed it. Rich people were always coming and going from these mansions. But then the man in the suit walked directly toward the construction site. He wasn't dressed like a homeowner. He wore the kind of expensive suit you saw on studio executives. The man stopped at the edge of the half-dug hole and looked down at Clint with an expression that was hard to read. For a long, uncomfortable moment, neither of them said anything.
Then the man spoke. "Are you an actor?" Clint straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. He must have looked ridiculous, covered in dirt, holding a shovel, standing in a hole he'd been digging all morning. Of all the questions he expected, that wasn't one of them. I was," Clint said carefully, "or I tried to be. Why do you ask?" The man didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked another one. "Would you be willing to test for a television series?" Clint's heart started pounding. He'd heard this kind of talk before, the vague promises from people who said they could help but never followed through. He'd learned to be skeptical. But something in this man's demeanor seemed different, more serious. "What kind of series?" Clint asked, trying not to sound too eager, trying not to hope too much. "A Western. It's called Rawhide. We're looking for someone to play the second lead, a character named Rowdy Yates. CBS is producing it, and we need someone who looks authentic, someone who can be believable as a young cowboy." Clint wanted to laugh. He'd just been rejected by half of Hollywood. He'd been told he was too tall, too stiff, too everything. And now this stranger was offering him an audition for a major network television show while he was literally standing in a hole in the ground covered in dirt. But Clint had learned one thing from all those rejections: never turn down an opportunity, no matter how unlikely it seemed. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow, CBS Television City. Ask for the Rawhide production office." The man handed Clint a business card, got back in his car, and drove away. Clint stood there in the hole, holding the card, wondering if he'd just imagined the entire conversation. He looked at the card. It was real. The man's name was Robert Sparks, an executive at CBS. That night, Clint barely slept. Part of him was excited, but a bigger part was terrified. He'd been rejected so many times. What if this was just another dead end? What if he embarrassed himself? He almost didn't go. But Maggie insisted. "You have nothing to lose," she told him. "The worst they can do is say no. You're already digging swimming pools. How much worse can it get?" She was right. So the next morning, Clint cleaned himself up, put on his best clothes, and drove to CBS Television City. The audition was strange. They wanted him to run into the camera range and improvise a scene where his character was angry at someone. The problem was, Clint hadn't had time to memorize all the dialogue, so he did what he'd always done best. He improvised. He came running in, started ranting and raving at an imaginary person, and poured every ounce of frustration from the past 3 years into that performance. When he finished, the room was silent. The producer, Charles Marquis Warren, stared at him with an expression Clint couldn't read. Clint was sure he'd blown it.
"Thank you," Warren said flatly. "We'll be in touch." Clint drove home, convinced he'd failed again. He told Maggie, "I didn't get it. I could tell by the way they looked at me." Maggie just smiled. "I bet you did." 3 days later, the phone rang. It was CBS. They wanted Clint Eastwood to play Rowdy Yates on Rawhide. The series would run for 8 seasons, and it would pay him more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Clint almost didn't believe it. After years of rejection, after being told he'd never make it, after digging holes in the ground while his dreams died, suddenly he had the break he'd been waiting for. But here's the thing that nobody knew at the time, not even Clint himself. This was just the beginning. Rawhide would make him a household name, but it wouldn't make him a legend. That would come later, when he traveled to Spain to film a low-budget Western called A Fistful of Dollars, a film that almost nobody expected to succeed. That film would create the man with no name, one of the most iconic characters in cinema history, and launch Clint Eastwood into international superstardom. From there, he'd become Dirty Harry, the cop who defined a generation. He'd direct masterpieces like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, winning Academy Awards and earning his place as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He'd act in over 70 films, direct more than 40, and build a career spanning 7 decades. But none of that would have happened if that man in a suit hadn't driven up to a construction site in the San Fernando Valley in 1958 and asked a dirt-covered pool digger if he was an actor. Years later, when Clint Eastwood was already famous, a reporter asked him about those difficult years before Rawhide. Clint was characteristically blunt. "For years, I bummed around trying to get a job," he said, "and it was the same old story. My voice was too soft, my teeth needed capping, I squinted too much, I was too tall. All that constant tearing down of my ego was bound to turn me into either a better person or a complete bastard." The reporter laughed, but Clint didn't. "I was close to quitting when Rawhide came along," he admitted. "If that hadn't happened, I don't know what I would have done. I might still be digging swimming pools." But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story isn't just that Clint Eastwood went from pool digger to Hollywood legend. It's what he did with that success.
He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot what it felt like to be rejected, to be told you're not good enough, to work back-breaking jobs just to survive. When Clint became a director, he was known for something unusual in Hollywood. He treated everyone on set with respect. The grips, the lighting technicians, the extras. He remembered that he'd been at the bottom once, and he never looked down on anyone trying to make it in the business. He was also famous for finishing films ahead of schedule and under budget, a rarity in Hollywood. Why? Because he'd spent years watching money being wasted on movie sets while he struggled to pay his rent. He knew the value of every dollar. And most importantly, he never gave up on people. When actors came to him nervous about their performances, worried they weren't good enough, Clint would tell them about his early days, about the rejections, about digging pools in the valley. He'd remind them that talent alone wasn't enough. You needed persistence, luck, and the willingness to keep going even when every door slammed in your face. The man who discovered Clint in that swimming pool hole, Robert Sparks, never became famous. His name isn't in the history books, but his decision to stop his car that day, to look at a struggling young man covered in dirt and see potential instead of failure, changed the course of entertainment history. Think about that for a moment. What if Sparks had driven past? What if he'd been too busy that day? What if Clint had called in sick to that pool digging job? Cinema as we know it would be different. We wouldn't have The Man with No Name. We wouldn't have Dirty Harry. We wouldn't have Unforgiven or $1 Million Baby or Gran Torino. All because one person saw something in a dirt-covered pool digger that Hollywood executives had missed. Today, Clint Eastwood is 94 years old. He's still making films. His latest movie, Juror Number 2, proves that even in his 10th decade of life, he's not done telling stories. But occasionally, in interviews, he'll mention those early days, the days of struggle and rejection and swimming pools in the valley. "I learned more digging those pools than I did in most acting classes," he once said. "I learned that hard work doesn't always pay off immediately. I learned that sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to survive until your moment comes. And I learned that you should never judge someone by what they're doing right now, because you have no idea what they're capable of becoming. So the next time you're struggling, the next time you feel like giving up, the next time someone tells you that you'll never make it, remember Clint Eastwood in that hole in the San Fernando Valley, covered in sweat and dirt, holding a shovel, one conversation away from everything he ever dreamed of. Remember that success isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, showing up to dig one more pool, taking one more audition, trying one more time, even when you're absolutely convinced it won't work. Because you never know who's going to pull up in a car and ask if you're an actor. You never know when your moment is coming. All you can do is be ready when it arrives. Clint Eastwood was ready, and that made all the difference. If this incredible story of perseverance inspired you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear that giving up is never the answer. Have you ever had a chance encounter that changed your life? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more true stories about the legends who refused to quit even when the whole world told them to.